German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced the delivery of modern air defence systems to Ukraine, following pleas from Kyiv to step up heavy weapons supplies. His address to Parliament came 3 months after he described the war in Ukraine as a turning point in German foreign and security policy. Scholz denounced what he called Russia's imperialist onslaught, and he promised to continue supporting Ukraine as long as necessary. Here's what the Chancellor had to say about this latest arms delivery.
In the
coming weeks, we will be delivering further weapons. The government has decided to deliver the IRIS-T system, for example, the most modern air defence system Germany has. This will enable the Ukrainian government to defend entire cities from Russian missile attacks. Furthermore, we will be delivering state-of-the-art radar systems that can locate enemy howitzers, mortars and artillery. This is a decision we've made, which will ensure the safety of Ukraine with the most modern of weapons. We are being very precise and doing what we can.
And I'm joined now by Melinda Crane, DW's chief political correspondent. Melinda, welcome. Now, the German Chancellor has been under fire for months now over his handling of the Ukraine crisis. Today, we heard that he announced the delivery of an air defence system to Ukraine. Is that in part a reaction to the criticism that he's been facing?
Indeed, it looks very much like that. He has been criticised both by allies abroad, but also here at home, including this morning by the head of the opposition, who spoke right before him and castigated him, essentially, for failing to walk the talk on Germany's promises of heavy weapons deliveries to support Ukraine. And such heavy weapons are more important now than ever as the conflict turns into a war of attrition in the east. Now, the Russians have been using aerial bombardment as part of their offensive in the east, so an anti-aircraft system like this one that's being promised by Germany, and by the way, the US is also promising to supply such systems, that will make a difference. And nonetheless, this newest pledge from Scholz essentially looks like more of the piecemeal, reactive approach that he has been criticized for. And it certainly won't satisfy those who say that battle tanks are key to holding off the Russians as they go into this war of attrition.
Now, the Chancellor promised that his handling of the Ukraine crisis would signal a turning point for German foreign policy at Zeitenwende. It's 3 months into the war now. After today's speech, can we say that he is truly leading Germany into a new era?
No. Basically, that speech that you refer to on February 27th, that took many people by surprise as the Chancellor essentially broke with long-standing German taboos on weapons deliveries to crisis zones. And there were hopes, possibly in some quarters even fears, that Germany would now finally begin punching at its weight in foreign and security policy, that it would perhaps even move into a true leadership role in European foreign and security policy. And those hopes have not been realized. And this certainly wasn't the statesman-like speech that I think many people were looking for. Now, admittedly, today's debate in the Bundestag is a debate about the Chancellery's budget. But the opposition leader used his moment right before Scholz's speech to talk about Ukraine. And what we heard from Scholz often sounded quite defensive and very much focused on domestic policy.
DW's Melinda Crane will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. The United States has also announced new military aid for Ukraine, a day after President Joe Biden said the US would not provide Kyiv with any weapons that could be used to strike Russian territory. He has now agreed to sending medium-range rocket systems like these after receiving assurances from Ukraine. Moscow has expressed concern over the move, saying it raises the risk of drawing the US into a confrontation with Russia. And we can take a closer look now at this latest batch of weapons headed for Ukraine with our military analyst, Frank Ledwidge, who joins us from Oxford in the UK. Welcome, Frank. Now, just 24 hours ago, President Biden clearly said the US would not deliver long-range rockets, a decision that you called deeply flawed and short-sighted. Can you give us your reaction to these latest announcements?
Well, Anya, it's good news for Ukraine and very bad news for Russian artillery crews and artillery commanders. Clearly, there was a messaging issue there within the American regime, which perhaps we can just put aside. But these weapon systems, specifically it's a system called the High Mobility Rocket Artillery System, was designed specifically in the 90s and the earlier generations, well before that during the Cold War, to take on Russian artillery superiority. And that's what they will do. Now, we're not going to see them fielded for several months, but when they do, they will make a difference. It's also very good news, by the way, that this is linked with, and I suspect it is linked with, the German announcement too, because these systems need good air defence, and the German announcement will assist in that. So it's excellent news. It will save Ukrainian lives, and it may well help them in the prosecution of the war at the operational level.
Now, despite the Russian advances in eastern Ukraine, the Pentagon is saying that Putin's army is repeating mistakes that it made at the beginning of the war. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. It's not so much mistakes that are being made. It's clear the Russians are learning, and you'd expect them to do that. Throughout history, they've done that. Armies do learn in combat. They do learn on operations. It's a whole field of study, actually, how they do that. But the problem is not so much how they learn to do things. And what the Pentagon is talking about is rather deeper than that, and that is the systemic problems they've got. And the systemic problems are really, really deep. So, for example, they're chronically and acutely short of infantry. So they major again, coming back to it again, artillery and armour. They're also riven by corruption and inefficiency and a command structure, and that's another thing that was mentioned by the Americans today, that does not encourage local initiative on the part of commanders. And that, of course, means that senior commanders get involved, they take casualties and so forth. It's an extremely inefficient way of fighting. So those systemic problems still remain. They're absolutely right about that, Anya, and they're likely to remain well into the future.
Now, the Kremlin has repeatedly warned the West against intervening in this war. In light of the weapons deliveries that we're hearing about, would you say it's still fair to say that the West has not intervened?
Yes, well, the Russians will rattle their sabres and draw their red lines and all the rest of it. And I think it points up one problem that some of us have been talking about for quite a while, and that is the litigation, constant litigation, constant talking about, will we send them this weapon system, will we send them that? Are we going to send 10 of these, 20 of those, 100 of these? When are they going to be trained? And all the things that you and I talk about on almost a daily basis. But the upshot of it all is that by the way, it gives a great gift to Russian intelligence. It means they don't have to do the work to find out what weapon systems are going their way. But to answer your question directly, yes, of course we're involved. Essentially, we are using Ukrainian bodies to serve, to the extent that they are our aims, our objectives, the West's objectives. And the West's objectives were set out by Lloyd Austin a few weeks ago, which was to grind down the Russian army so that it can't be a threat to its neighbours. And that's being done by the Ukrainian army with Western weapons. So, yes, of course, we're involved.
Frank Ledwidge, military analyst. Good to talk to you as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya.